How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? Looks like Isaiah was quite the drama queen when it came to Lucifer's fall from grace. One might say he had a flair for the prophetic punchline. These haunting words from the book of Isaiah have survived through the ages, enshrining Lucifer as the archetype of the rebel angel, the shining one whose hubris led to a catastrophic fall from grace. But what if this mythic figure represents something profound and vital and enlightening about the human psyche? What if Lucifer's shadow battuta with the divine is a mirror for our own inner struggles between light and darkness, submission and self-assertion, creation and destruction? These are daring questions that Carl Jung asks. This great explorer of the unconscious invites us to think. In his masterworks Mysterium Coniunctionis and Aion, Jung is steeped into medieval alchemy and Christian mysticism to unearth the enigma of Lucifer anew. Let's plunge with Jung now and see what light we might steal from the darkness. It is obviously a moment of supreme possibilities, both for good and for evil. Usually, however, it is first one and then the other. The good man succumbs to evil, the sinner is converted to good, and that, to an uncritical eye, is the end of the matter. Right away, Jung slaps us with this staggering paradox of the psyche, that within us good and evil are strange bedfellows, entangled in an eternal, ever-shifting communion or conjunction. As Nietzsche provocatively put it, whatever is done out of love always takes place beyond good and evil. How lovely, Friedrich. But Jung goes further, suggesting that the inner drama of contraries catalyzes the growth or ascension of the soul. He writes, "The one after another is a bearable prelude to the deeper knowledge of the side-by-side, for this is an incomparably more difficult problem." Again, the view that good and evil are spiritual forces outside us, and that man is caught in the conflict between them, is more bearable by far than the insight that the opposites are the ineradicable and indispensable preconditions of all psychic life. So much so that life itself is guilt. In these searing lines, Jung slams the hammer over the common notion that we can neatly separate good and evil, whether in the world or in ourselves. He insists that the clash of opposites within the psyche is not some unfortunate aberration, but the necessary friction by which consciousness is struck, like a match against the rough edge of the box. A deeply unsettling realization. Evil is an intimate and inescapable part of our own being, of ourselves. Look at yourself in the mirror and tell yourselves you haven't done anything bad in the last year. Are you sure of your pure angelic whiteness? As Solzhenitsyn so memorably put it, the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart. Jung sees in the figure of Lucifer a potent symbol for this ineradicable and indispensable shadow element that haunts the form of the psyche. In rebelling against God, Lucifer represents the ego in its hubristic refusal to submit to something greater than itself. As Jung writes, even a life dedicated to God is still lived by an ego which speaks of an ego and asserts an ego in God's despite, which does not instantly merge itself with God, but reserves for itself a freedom and a will which it sets up outside God and against Him. Jung is highlighting here the mind-bending truth that even in our most sincere attempts to surrender to the divine, there is still some part of us that resists, that insists on its own separate will. This is the Luciferian spark within us, the impulse to self-assertion that sets us apart from the ground of being, for better and for worse. But Jung also intuited that this fallen angel is not just a diabolical adversary to be defeated by the fiery sword of Michael, but a teacher. He notes the strange symmetry between Lucifer and Christ in religious iconography. It is also worth noting that Lucifer, the morning star, means Christ as well as the devil. And I know that most people's world is shattered when they hear this. But listen, in this observation, Jung hints at the uncanny kinship between the demonic and the divine. Just as Lucifer bears the light before his fall, Christ must journey through the valley of the shadow on his way to resurrection. The path of wholeness seems to require a descent into the depths, a wrestling match with the angel of darkness. As Nietzsche intuited in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. Perhaps Lucifer is that chaos within us, the prima materia out of which the philosopher's stone of the self is painfully forged. Let's not be too quick to banish the devil from our midst, because confronting Lucifer as our own shadow is an opportunity to redeem the darkness, to alchemize evil into creative and spiritual fuel for the journey of individuation. Can't you see it? It's not as if it will go away if you don't do anything about it, so you need to understand it and control it. This is no easy task, to be sure. Jung warns us, the Alchemical Opus deals with the tedious, painstaking work of analysis and synthesis, by which the imperfect earthly man, the man of sin, is transformed, transfigured, and redeemed from his mortal state and made capable of eternal life. In religious language, this means that if a man succeeds in overcoming himself, in the moral and spiritual sense, he can establish a new inner order, an equilibrium of opposites, which gives him peace. The path to wholeness leads through the heart of darkness. We must have the courage to face our inner Lucifer, to bear the tension of opposites within us, if we are ever to realize that equilibrium Jung speaks of. This is the steep price and rich promise of self-knowledge. In befriending our own demons, we can become more fully human. As Jung repeatedly emphasized, there is no light without shadow, no growth without pain, no integration without disintegration. Embrace this Luciferian light, this black sun within, and see by its glow the hidden features of our fractured yet beautiful psychic fractals. In embracing our inner complexity, in reclaiming our devilish depths, we might give the angels in us their due. As we continue our journey, we will see how Lucifer mirrors the personal and collective shadow, and what wisdom we might glean from dancing with our darkness. In the previous section, we began to dissect Jung's provocative idea that Lucifer represents an essential aspect of the human psyche, that Promethean impulse to rebel against the established order, to assert our own will in the face of the divine. But as we hinted, this fallen angel is a reflection of our own inner darkness, the shadow we each must confront on the path to wholeness. Jung was obsessed with the shadow, that hidden, rejected part of ourselves we do not want to acknowledge. He saw it as the doorway to the unconscious, the threshold we must cross if we are ever to truly know ourselves. As he wrote in Aion, the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. To become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real. This is no small task. We spend much of our lives in flight from our darker halves, projecting our disowned faults and impulses onto others. To withdraw these projections and own our shadow is a heroic labor, fraught with fear and trembling. It requires what the poet Rainer Maria Rilke called the great inner solitude, the courage to descend into the abyss of the psyche and have an espresso with your monsters who are waiting for you. They want to talk to you, and you need to face them with courage, power, and wisdom, because they are not the final boss. For Jung, this confrontation with the shadow is the sine qua non of the individuation process, the lifelong journey towards wholeness and self-realization. He insists, it is a frightening thought that man also has a shadow side to him, consisting not just of little weaknesses and foibles, but of a positively demonic dynamism. The individual seldom knows anything of this. To him, as an individual, it is incredible that he should ever in any circumstances go beyond himself. But let these harmless creatures form a mass, and there emerges a raging monster. Jung suggests that the shadow is both personal and collective. When we fail to integrate our own darkness, it doesn't just go away. It coalesces into the raging monster of mob violence, scapegoating, and mass psychosis. The 20th century bore horrific witness to this truth, from the Holocaust to the Gulag. So the confrontation with the shadow is an ethical imperative, not just for individuals but for societies. As Jung argues, we know that the wildest and most moving dramas are played not in the theatre, but in the hearts of ordinary men and women who pass by without exciting attention, and who betray to the world nothing of the conflicts that rage within them. except possibly by a nervous breakdown. What is so difficult for the layman to grasp is the fact that in most cases, the patients themselves have no suspicion whatever of the internecine war raging in their unconscious. If we remember that there are many people who understand nothing at all about themselves, we shall be less surprised at the realization that there are also people who are utterly unaware of their actual conflicts. In a sense, we are all walking battlefields, our psyches the stage for the wildest and most moving dramas of light and darkness, creation and destruction. Most of us spend our lives blissfully ignorant of these inner conflicts, until a crisis, a nervous breakdown, a moral failure, a dark night of the soul, forces us to face our shadow at last. I guess you have to see Los Angeles in flames to understand that hell is a place on earth. This is where Lucifer comes in. As the archetypal rebel, the eternal antagonist, he embodies the shadow in all its destructive and transformative potential. He is the serpent in the garden, the tempter who lures us into forbidden knowledge and exile from paradise. But he is also the Promethean firebringer, the Faustian seeker after truth, the sly messenger who tricks the gods on our behalf, even if he hates us, or even if he gives us false expectations. In alchemical terms, Lucifer is the lead that must be transmuted into gold, the blackening, nigredo, that precedes the whitening, albedo, and the reddening, rubedo, in the great work of self-transformation. He is the prima materia, the chaos within that must be distilled and disciplined into a higher order. As Jung observed, the opus magnum had two aims: the rescue of the human soul and the salvation of the cosmos. The first was relatively easy and was accomplished by the alchemical process of transmutation. This process was understood as a symbolic death and rebirth, with the resurrection symbolized by the lapis, the rebis, and the filius regius. For Jung, alchemy was a profound symbolic language for the journey of individuation, the slow and painful transmutation of the self through the fires of the unconscious. The confrontation with the shadow, the integration of evil, was a crucial stage in this great work, a dark and dangerous passage that promised rebirth and renewal on the other side. But this is no easy or certain undertaking. As Jung warns, in the last analysis, every life is the realization of a whole, that is, of a self, for which reason this realization can also be called individuation. All life is bound to individual carriers who realize it, and it is simply inconceivable without them. But every carrier is charged with an individual destiny and destination, and the realization of these alone makes sense of life. In other words, the opus contra naturam, the work against nature that is self-realization, is a profoundly personal and perilous undertaking. There are no guarantees, no universal formulas. Each of us must find our own way through the labyrinth of the psyche, confront our own demons, transmute our own lead into gold. And yet, as Jung suggests, this painful process is the only thing that can truly make sense of life, that can redeem our suffering and give our existence meaning and purpose. In wrestling with our inner Lucifers, in claiming our shadow as our own, we participate in the great cosmic drama of fall and redemption, death and rebirth. Take heart from the alchemists of old, who dared to dream of turning base matter into the philosopher's stone. Dare to have the courage to face our darkest depths, trusting that the light of consciousness will not abandon us in that underworld. For it is only in embracing our wholeness, in all its terrible beauty, that we can hope to realize our deepest destiny. Our quest for understanding leads us next to how this alchemical opus plays out on the grand stage of myth and religion, as reflected in the uncanny symmetry between Lucifer and Christ, the shadow and the self. We explored how Jung saw in the figure of Lucifer a powerful symbol for the shadow, that dark, rejected part of the psyche that we must confront and integrate on the path to wholeness. But Jung also intuited a strange and uncanny symmetry between Lucifer and Christ, a mirroring that hints at the profound complexity of the self. Let's read some of the key Jung quotes that brilliantly highlight the paradoxical relationship. The figure of Christ is not as simple and unequivocal as one could wish. I am not referring here to the enormous difficulties arising out of a comparison of the synoptic Christ with the Johannine Christ, but to the remarkable fact that in the hermeneutic writings of the Church Fathers, which go right back to the days of primitive Christianity, Christ has a number of symbols or allegories in common with the devil. Of these I would mention the lion snake, colliber viper, bird, devil, nocturna avis, raven, Christ, Nightikorax, night heron, eagle and fish. It is also worth noting that Lucifer, the morning star, means Christ as well as the devil. This passage is mind-bending in its implications. Jung is pointing out that from the very beginnings of Christianity, there has been a recognition of the deep symbolic resonance between Christ and the devil. They share a whole bestiary of emblems: the lion, the snake, the raven, the eagle, the fish. Even more startling, the name Lucifer, the morning star, refers to both Christ and the devil. What are we to make of this? One way to understand it is through the lens of the self, which for Jung is the archetype of wholeness, the God image within the psyche. The self contains all the opposites in their fullness: good and evil, light and darkness, masculine and feminine. Christ and Lucifer can be seen as personifications of the light and dark aspects of the self, the two faces of God. This is a challenging idea for the Christian worldview, which tends to split the world into stark polarities of good and evil. But as we saw in the previous sections, Jung insists that the opposites are inextricably entwined in the psyche, and that the path to wholeness leads not around but through the darkness. As he writes, there can be no doubt that the original Christian conception of the imago Dei embodied in Christ meant an all-embracing totality that even includes the animal side of man. Nevertheless, the Christ symbol lacks wholeness in the modern psychological sense, since it does not include the dark side of things, but specifically excludes it in the form of a Luciferian opponent. For Jung, the traditional Christian view of Christ is incomplete from a psychological perspective because it splits off the shadow and projects it onto an external devil figure. But the self, the true imago Dei within, must embrace both the light and the darkness. Lucifer is the dark brother of Christ, the necessary other half of the God image. This is not to say that good and evil are equivalent, or that we should give in to our darkest impulses. Rather, it is a call to wholeness, to integrating the shadow rather than rejecting it. As Jung suggests, this is a moral and spiritual imperative. Although the exclusion of the power of evil was something the Christian consciousness was well aware of, all it lost in effect was an insubstantial shadow. For, through the doctrine of the privatio boni first propounded by Origen, evil was characterized as a mere diminution of good and thus deprived of substance. According to the teachings of the Church, evil is simply the accidental lack of perfection. This assumption resulted in the proposition omni bonum ad Deo, omni malum ab homine. Another logical consequence was the subsequent elimination of the devil in certain Protestant sects. In other words, by reducing evil to a mere absence of good and placing all the blame on human failings, Christian doctrine lost sight of the reality and potency of the shadow. The elimination of the devil figure in some Protestant traditions was a logical outcome of this. But for Jung, it represents a dangerous denial of the darkness within the divine itself. So what is the alternative? Jung points to the mystical traditions within Christianity, such as the visions of Jacob Boehmer, that acknowledge the wrath fire of God, the darkness and terror of the divine. He also looks to alchemy as a symbolic language that sought to unite the opposites and transform the shadow into the philosopher's stone of the self. As he writes, we may therefore suppose that in alchemy, an attempt was made at a symbolical integration of evil by localizing the divine drama of redemption in man himself. This process appears now as an extension of redemption beyond man to matter, now as an ascent of the spirit of imitation or Lucifer, and as a reconciliation of this with the spirit descending from above, both the above and below, undergoing a process of mutual transformation. For the alchemists, the work was not just about redeeming the human soul, but about transforming matter itself, raising up the fallen Lucifer principle and reconciling it with the divine light from above. This was a staggering vision of wholeness, one that located the drama of good and evil within the individual psyche and the cosmos as a whole. So secrets lie hidden in these enigmatic truths. What wisdom can we glean from Jung's insights into the Christ-Lucifer syzygy? Perhaps the key is to recognize that the path to wholeness is about consciously engaging with the shadow. We must have the courage to face our inner darkness, to acknowledge the Lucifer within us, if we are to truly individuate and become all that we can be. This requires what Jung calls the moral effort to own our shadow, to withdraw our projections, and take responsibility for our own darkness. It means letting go of simplistic notions of good and evil, and learning to hold the tension of opposites within us. But if we can do this, if we can bear the crucible of transformation, we open ourselves to a deeper and more authentic experience of the divine. We become vessels for the self, the God image within, in all its light and darkness, its beauty and terror. In a sense, we are called to become alchemists of the soul, working patiently and persistently to unite the above and below, to marry the solar Christ and the lunar Lucifer within us. Only then can we realize the philosopher's stone of the self, that pearl of great price that is our birthright and our destiny. As the great Sufi mystic Rumi wrote, "Every midday go eagerly into your innermost chamber if you want to bloom like a rose garden, silently and ceaselessly, into the darkness everywhere." Once again, this is very important. Have the courage to venture into your own darkness, trusting that the light of consciousness will guide you through. Embrace our inner Lucifer, knowing that he is the key to our wholeness, the strange and terrible brother of our own divinity. We observed Jung's provocative idea that Christ and Lucifer are two faces of the same archetype, the light and dark aspects of the self. We saw how the path to wholeness requires us to confront and integrate our inner shadow, symbolized by the fallen angel Lucifer. But for Jung, this work of shadow integration was not just an individual task, but a collective and historical one. He saw in the history of alchemy a powerful symbolic language for the transformation of consciousness itself, a way of uniting the opposites and redeeming the darkness within the psyche and the cosmos as a whole. Jung writes, "The alchemists were fond of picturing their opus as a circulatory process, as a circular distillation, or as the Ouroboros, the snake biting its own tail, and they made innumerable pictures of this process. Just as the central idea of the lapis philosophorum plainly signifies the self, so the opus with its countless symbols illustrates the process of individuation, the step-by-step development of the self from an unconscious state to a conscious one. For Jung, the alchemical work was a profound metaphor for the individuation process, the lifelong journey towards wholeness and self-realization. The countless symbols of alchemy, the Ouroboros, the philosopher's stone, the sacred marriage of opposites, all pointed to the mystery of the self, the archetype of unity and totality. Jung saw in alchemy a collective striving of the human spirit, a groping towards a new level of consciousness. As he writes, "That is why the lapis, as prima materia, stands at the beginning of the process as well as at the end." According to Michael Mayer, the gold, another synonym for the self, comes from the opus circulatorium of the sun. This circle is the line that runs back upon itself, like the serpent that with its head bites its own tail, wherein that eternal painter and potter, God, may be discerned. The alchemical work is a circular process, a journey that ends where it begins. The prima materia, the chaotic and undifferentiated starting point, is transformed through a series of operations into the philosopher's stone, the embodiment of wholeness and perfection. But this endpoint is also a new beginning, a return to the source with a higher level of consciousness. For Jung, this circular nature of the opus pointed to the underlying unity of existence, the self, as the eternal ground of being. The alchemists intuited that God was not just a transcendent figure out there, but an immanent presence within nature and the psyche. As Jung observes, "In this circle nature has related the four qualities to one another and drawn, as it were, an equilateral square, since contraries are bound together by contraries and enemies by enemies with the same everlasting bonds. The alchemical work was about uniting the opposites, not just good and evil, but masculine and feminine, spirit and matter, conscious and unconscious. The four elements, earth, air, fire and water, were seen as expressions of these fundamental polarities, which had to be brought into balance and harmony. This was no easy task. As we saw in the previous sections, the confrontation with the shadow is a harrowing and perilous journey, one that requires great courage and persistence. But for the alchemists, it was a sacred and necessary labor, one that mirrored the redemptive work of Christ himself. As Jung writes, the fire of divine wrath suggests Böhmer's divine wrath fire. I do not know whether there is a direct connection between them. In our treatise, God's wrath falling upon Christ turns against God himself. Böhmer discusses this question in Aurora and Questiones Theosophicae, and says that on the one hand, the wrath fire comes from the dryness, one of the 7 qualities of creation, and on the other hand, it is connected with the first principle of divine revelation, the darkness, Genesis 1:2, which reaches into the fire, tabula principiorum. The fire is hidden in the center of the light as well as in all creatures, and was kindled by Lucifer. For Jung, the fire of divine wrath that falls upon Christ in the crucifixion is the same fire that burns in the heart of the alchemical work. It is the fire of transformation, the purifying flames that burn away the dross and reveal the gold within. But it is also the fire of Lucifer, the rebellious angel who fell from grace and became the Lord of darkness. In the mystical visions of Jacob Böhmer, this wrath fire is both a destructive and a creative force. The dark side of God that must be redeemed and integrated. It is the fire that burns in the center of the light, the shadow that gives depth and contrast to the divine radiance. This is the great paradox of the Alchemical Opus. The work of redemption must pass through the fires of hell, the crucible of the shadow. As Jung observes, it is also worth noting that Lucifer, the morning star, means Christ as well as the devil. Christ and Lucifer are 2 sides of the same coin, the light and dark faces of the self. To redeem the one is to redeem the other, to unite the opposites and achieve the ultimate wholeness. This is the essence of the alchemical philosophy. The work is not just about perfecting the individual soul, but about transforming the cosmos itself. As Jung writes, Milius compares it to the rainbow. The sulfur shines like the rainbow above the waters. The bow of Isis stands half on the pure liquid and flowing water and half on the earth. Hence the whole property of sulfur and its natural likeness are expressed by the rainbow. Thus, sulfur, so far as it is symbolized by the rainbow, is a divine and wonderful experience. The rainbow is a symbol of the bridge between heaven and earth, the union of the above and the below. It is the alchemical sulfur, the fiery principle that mediates between spirit and matter, conscious and unconscious. And it is a divine and wonderful experience, a glimpse of the ultimate mystery of existence. So what challenges and opportunities do these insights present to the seeker of wholeness? What can we take from all this? What wisdom can we glean from Jung's insights into the Alchemical Opus? Perhaps the key is to recognize that the work of individuation is a participation in the great cosmic drama of redemption. By confronting our shadow, by uniting the opposites within us, we are not just healing ourselves, but contributing to the transformation of the world itself. This is a staggering vision, one that shatters our modern radiography of the isolated individual. It suggests that our deepest spiritual work is about aligning ourselves with the underlying unity of existence, the self that is the source and goal of all being. It means taking up the mantle of the alchemists, becoming philosophers and mystics in the truest sense, lovers of wisdom who dare to peer into the heart of the mystery, to unite the light and the darkness within and without. As Jung himself put it, the opus magnum had 2 aims: the rescue of the human soul and the salvation of the cosmos. The first was relatively easy and was accomplished by the alchemical process of transmutation. This process was understood as a symbolic death and rebirth, with the resurrection symbolized by the lapis, the rebis, and the filius regius. Undertake this great work, face the shadow within, and redeem the darkness in the world around you. I invite you to become alchemists of the soul, working patiently and persistently to unite the opposites and birth the philosopher's stone of wholeness. For in doing so, we are participating in the glorious apotheosis that is the destiny of consciousness. We have followed Jung on a profound and provocative journey into the heart of the psyche, exploring the archetype of Lucifer as a symbol of the shadow, the dark face of the self that must be confronted and integrated on the path to wholeness. We have seen how this work of shadow integration is not just an individual task, but a collective and historical one, reflected in the esoteric tradition of alchemy and its quest to unite the opposites and transform the cosmos itself. Now, in this final section, we will bring our exploration to a climax as we consider how this alchemical opus plays out on the grandest possible stage, the evolution of human consciousness. Here is another vivid and evocative prose from Jung. In the Age of Enlightenment, the intolerable contradiction of two natures in one God had led to a considerable strengthening of the Luciferian position. This was the case particularly in Gnosticism, which exalted Lucifer, the prince of this world, to the rank of adversary of the world creator, that is, the demiurge. The inevitable consequence of this was a metaphysical dualism which assigned equal rights to good and evil, and in certain heretical systems subordinated the Redeemer God to the devil. Lucifer revealed himself, not without reason, as an aspect of the Creator God. In this dense and dizzying passage, Jung suggests that the Age of Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason and suspicion of religious dogma, led to a resurgence of the Luciferian position. Gnostic traditions exalted Lucifer as the adversary of the world creator, the demiurge, leading to a metaphysical dualism that assigned equal rights to good and evil. In some heretical systems, the Redeemer God was even subordinated to the devil. As Jung puts it, Lucifer revealed himself, not without reason, as an aspect of the Creator God. Pause for a moment to unpack the implications of this. Throughout Western history, there has been a tendency to split the divine into two opposing forces, the good God of light and the evil God of darkness. This reached a fever pitch in the Gnostic traditions of late antiquity, which saw the material world as the corrupt creation of an inferior deity, the demiurge, who was often identified with the Yahweh of the Old Testament. Lucifer, the bringer of light, was seen as a heroic rebel against this tyrannical creator god, a Promethean figure who stole the fire of consciousness for humanity. Jung sees this Luciferian development as a necessary stage in the evolution of human consciousness. By elevating Lucifer to the status of a divinity, even making him superior to the Christian God of redemption, these heretical movements were giving voice to the shadow, the rejected and repressed aspects of the psyche. They were acknowledging the reality of evil, not as a mere privation of good, but as an active and autonomous force within the cosmos and within the human soul. But Jung also recognized the dangers of this Luciferian inflation. When the shadow is given free rein, it can possess the ego and lead to a state of psychic inflation, a grandiose identification with archetypal powers that can have destructive consequences. As he writes, the de-Christianization of our world, the Luciferian development of science and technology, and the frightful material and moral destruction left behind by the Second World War have been compared more than once with the eschatological events foretold in the New Testament. These, as we know, are concerned with the coming of the Antichrist. The Age of Enlightenment, when humanity said, "God is dead, long live science." And Lucifer said, "Hold my beer." Turns out, even the devil can have a renaissance. Who knew? For Jung, the horrors of the 20th century, the world wars, totalitarian regimes, the Holocaust, were manifestations of this Luciferian shadow run amok. The de-Christianization of the world, the triumph of secular materialism and technological hubris, had unleashed destructive forces that threatened to engulf humanity in a catastrophic Armageddon of the psyche. But Jung also saw a glimmer of hope in this apocalyptic scenario. Just as the Book of Revelation prophesies the defeat of the Antichrist and the coming of a new Jerusalem, Jung envisioned the possibility of a new stage in the evolution of consciousness, a third dispensation beyond the dualities of good and evil, light and shadow. As he writes, "The apocalypse is full of expectations of terrible things that will take place at the end of time, before the marriage of the Lamb. This shows plainly that the anima Christiana has a sure knowledge not only of the existence of an adversary, but also of his future usurpation of power." The anima Christiana, the Christian soul, carries within it an awareness of the Antichrist, the shadow that must be confronted and transformed in the final battle for the soul of humanity. This is the ultimate meaning of the Alchemical Opus, the chemical wedding that unites the opposites and gives birth to the philosopher's stone of a higher consciousness. So what would this new consciousness look like? Jung gives us a hint when he speaks of the third dispensation as a solificatio, an integration of the sun and moon, the rational and intuitive functions of the psyche. The solificatio then, in psychological terms, means the conscious realization of the self, with all the moral, intellectual and practical consequences that this entails. It is the aim of the alchemical Mysterium Coniunctionis is to bring about this solificatio through the synthesis of the two principles. The archetypes of masculine and feminine, light and darkness, the king and queen, the sun and the moon. This synthesis is the end product and goal of the whole dialectic of the Opus Alchemicum. The alchemical work is ultimately about the union of opposites within the psyche, the sacred marriage of masculine and feminine, light and shadow, that gives birth to the divine child of the self. This is the true philosopher's stone, the pearl of great price that is the goal of the individuation process. But this is not a purely individual achievement. As Jung emphasizes, the solificatio has moral, intellectual and practical consequences for the world at large. By integrating the shadow, by redeeming the Luciferian darkness within, we are not only healing ourselves, but contributing to the transformation of human consciousness as a whole. This is the great task that Jung sets before us: to become alchemists of the soul, laborers in the great work of redeeming the world from the grip of the shadow. It is a task that requires immense courage, persistence and humility in the face of forces far greater than our conscious egos. But it is also a task that promises untold rewards, the discovery of the true self, the pearl beyond price, and the possibility of a new heaven and a new earth. As the great alchemist Paracelsus wrote, "He who would understand the book of nature must walk its pages with his feet. We must be willing to descend into the depths, to confront the dragons and demons of the underworld, if we are to emerge victorious with the treasure of a transformed consciousness." This is the path of the hero, the way of the alchemist, the initiatory journey that all the great mythologies and wisdom traditions have pointed to since the dawn of time. It is a path that is both intensely personal and profoundly transpersonal, a solo journey that is also a participation in the great cosmic drama of the redemption of the world. Dare to take up the challenge that Jung lays before us. Have the ambition to face our shadows, to integrate our demons, to unite the opposites within and without. Together we'll become midwives of the divine child, the new consciousness that is the hope and promise of a world reborn. As Jung himself said, the way to the goal seems chaotic and interminable at first, and only gradually do the signs increase that it is leading anywhere. The way is not straight, but appears to go round in circles. More accurate knowledge has proved it to go in spirals. The dream motifs always return after certain intervals to definite forms whose characteristic it is to define a center, and as a matter of fact the whole process revolves about a central point, or some arrangement round a center, which may in certain circumstances appear even in the initial dreams. The path of individuation is a spiral path, a journey that seems to go in circles but is always leading us closer to the center, the self that is the source and goal of our being. It is a journey that requires faith, perseverance, and a willingness to embrace the unknown, the darkness that is the prelude to the light. In the end, the Alchemical Opus is a labor of love. Love for the self, love for the world, love for the divine spark that dwells within all things. It is a sacred work that sanctifies the profane, that transforms the lead of our base nature into the gold of a luminous wisdom. So let's join together in this great work, this magnum opus of the human spirit. Let's become philosophers of the forge, alchemists of the apocalypse, co-creators of the new heaven and the new earth that is our birthright and our destiny. As the great Sufi mystic Ibn Arabi wrote, "My heart has become capable of every form. It is a pasture for gazelles and a monastery for Christian monks, a temple for idols and a Kaaba for the pilgrim, the tables of the Torah and the book of the Quran. I profess the religion of love, and whatever direction its steed may take, love is my religion and my faith." May we all find the courage to profess the religion of love, to follow the direction of the steed of the self, wherever it may lead us. For in the end, love is the only alchemy that matters, the only philosopher's stone that can transmute the darkness into light. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the depths of Jung's alchemical vision. May the light of the Solificatio shine upon you now and always. And with that, dear viewers, I release you back into the wild. May you go forth and individuate like there's no tomorrow. Because let's be honest, with the state of the world today, there might not be. But hey, at least we'll have Jung to keep us company in the collective unconscious. Until next time, keep shining that light into the darkness, you crazy sons.